I often wonder if kids play games like hide-and-go-seek anymore. I know a lot of kids have smartphones, video game systems, computers, things like that. It makes me wonder how many of them go out and play old games still. In a similar vein, when I was a kid, the neighborhood used to be crawling with kids going trick-or-treating on or around Halloween. I still live in the same area and haven't had one single kid knock on my door for candy in at least 10 years. If they don't, though, at least I know they won't ever have to experience something like I did once back then. I don't remember how old I was exactly, but this was sometime in the late 70s, I believe. I might have been around 8 or 9 at the time. I was out playing some hide-and-go-seek with my friends, and a fairly large group of them too. I was a very competitive person. I always felt like I had to win the game no matter what. Because of this, I spent some extra time always looking for the best places to hide. I would always go the farthest from the base, but I wasn't worried about making it back safely. I just wanted to be impossible to be found, to the point where the person who was it would eventually give up, and I would get to come out scot-free. We'd had a few rounds of the game, and I hadn't achieved this quite yet. I was lucky enough to not be it at any point yet at least. I was determined to find a really good place to hide, but I didn't know any spots that were good enough in the area I was in. I trotted off down the street thinking that the further away I was, eventually I would find some place that would be a great place to hide. I was walking behind a house when suddenly the back door shot open. A man was standing in the doorway. I had never seen him before. He motioned at me to start coming towards him, and I did. I normally always did whatever the adults asked me to do. "Say, you kids are playing hide-and-seek, right?" he asked me. He was basically whispering at the time. I thought it was because he didn't want to reveal to the person who was it where I was and spoil our game. "Yeah?" I responded. "I got a real good spot where they'll never find you," the man whispered to me. "Come in here. I'll let you hide out in my basement." Well, to an 8-year-old kid, that sounded like a great idea. We weren't supposed to go into houses while playing, but if no one could find me, no one would ever know I'd broken the rules. Also, if an adult was okay with breaking the rules, then why shouldn't a kid be? I ran up to the guy's house and was getting close to the entrance when I heard a voice yell at me. "Andy, you get over here right now!" It was my older brother. He was around 13 at the time. He wasn't playing the game with us, but I guess it was around dinner time and he had been sent out to search for me. I turned back to the man who was offering to let me hide in his basement, but he slammed the door shut and ran back into his house. My brother came and grabbed me by the arm. He pulled me back toward the area we lived in. "Don't ever talk to that man again," he told me sternly. "He's not a good person." I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew my brother very well, and there was an edge to his voice that made me absolutely obey him. I found out later there were stories about this guy and the things he would do to children. I don't know if they were true, because I always thought he would be in jail if they were. However, I can't really think of any other reason he would try to get an 8-year-old to hide in his house's basement. This happened when I was at high school. I was pretty young and got into a car accident as I was on the way to school. The car was pulling out of a car park just as I was about to cross the road. I waited, the driver also paused, and we were both still. The driver then did the usual gesture of go ahead with his hand and allowed me to go ahead and cross the road. Well, I started to walk across the road and raised my hand to thank the driver. At that point, the car pulled forward and knocked me right off my bike. I remember sitting up in the road in a complete daze. I stared down at my legs as they were bleeding. For some reason, I just shouted, "It's an accident!" The driver came rushing out of his car. As he crouched down by my side, he said in a very monotonous voice, "Are you alright? Can you still make it to school?" I was confused. I wanted to get away from this guy. Something felt weird about him. I said, "Yeah, I could still make it." As soon as I replied to him, he swiftly walked back to his car and pulled away. I ended up going to school that day, and when I told my friends about what happened, they were so surprised. "Hey man, go and see the school nurse, you're bleeding and bruised." My friends were very concerned. Well, I took this friend's advice and went to go see the nurse. I didn't know the name of the guy who'd hit me. I didn't know how often he used that parking spot, and I hadn't really gotten a good look at him either. I doubted I would be able to find him. It was frustrating when I couldn't answer any of the nurse's questions. My wounds healed up and about a half a year passed by. I was initially very suspicious every time I crossed a road, but I slowly grew less wary. That was until I was crossing the road at the very same parking lot on my bike again, and the exact same thing happened. Moreover, it was the same driver. This time he hit me so hard I was launched into the road, and my bike flew even further. Again, the driver got out of the car and slowly walked over to me. "Can you still make it to school?" He didn't even wait for my response this time. He just got back in his car, drove around my bike, and fled from the scene. I felt so helpless. I was only 14 years old, and here was this fully grown adult running me over for no reason. It was horrible. I couldn't do anything. This last time, I went to see the school nurse. I changed the route I walked to school. I didn't want to go past that car park again. There was another incident in the same parking lot it happened in too. A kid a few grades below mine. He was hit by a car pulling out of the parking lot. According to the kid's friends at school, the driver got out of the car and asked the kid if he could still make it to school. At this point, I knew this was more than just a coincidence. This was malicious and intentional. I was sure of it. Another incident happened soon after. This time, a kid was hit by a car. The kid didn't get up, but a passerby who witnessed the crash rushed him to the hospital, thankfully. He was able to survive. The passerby took down the driver's number plate. The driver was arrested. It was really great to know this guy wouldn't be driving around there anymore. They had an assembly about it at school, asking for any of the other victims to come forward. So I did. I was interviewed by the police. They confirmed what I already knew. I had been hit by the same guy both times, and so had the other kids. We weren't the only victims either. The man offered no explanation as to why he did this. Maybe he had a private grudge against students or our school. Maybe he just wanted to test how hard a student could get hit by his car and still recover. I guess I'll never know. I'm still very conscious of these events though. That man was a complete psycho, running over people on purpose and leaving them in the street, especially doing this to children. I used to get freaked out by ghosts, but now I'm terrified of humans instead. I spent a little bit of time basically homeless, living out of my car. I was a lot luckier than other homeless people, I suppose. I had a job and I could find places to shower and do all of that while I was trying to save up for a place to live. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't the greatest life either, as you can probably imagine. The hardest thing though was finding a place to park and sleep throughout the night. This was in the late 1990s, in the far north suburbs of Chicago. I tried sometimes parking in apartment building parking lots, but they were just as difficult to stay in as business parking lots. You had to have permits for basically anywhere that you parked, proving you were a resident of that building. Since I wasn't a resident of any of these buildings, that was really hard to do. Because of this, I had to switch around quite a lot. I would rarely stay in the same place 2 times. I would drive around and find places at the last minute. Motel parking lots were decent for a night, but I would have to get up early in the morning to keep from getting caught there. This was happening during the winter time too. I was working and there was a snowstorm that had been on the verge of breaking all day long. It had been slowly snowing and building up all day. This didn't really bother me. I thought at the very least that with snow piling up over the cars, no one would be paying much attention to where I was parking mine. I thought it would be a pretty easy night for me. I couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't realize just how much more difficult finding a parking space in a snowstorm would be than normal. I couldn't find anything anywhere for the longest time until I finally gave up because I was tired. I'd never tried sleeping parked on the side of the street by a meter or anything for fear of a cop walking by and seeing me. I thought that just this once it would be fine. I laid down with my car covered in built-up snow. Surely no one would notice anyway. I bit it and decided to try this. I found a place to park in town and quietly turned my car off. I crawled into the back seat with tons of my blankets and covered up, determined to get some sleep. I was just about drifting off when I heard a banging on the window of my car. It startled me, of course. Immediately, I thought a police officer must have found me. I looked out from under the blanket, feeling scared because I didn't want to get arrested. What I saw was much scarier than a cop, however. It was what I assumed was another homeless person looking inside my window. I wasn't scared because they were homeless, though. I was scared because of the crazy look on this guy's face and the fact that the man began pounding even harder. He wasn't just knocking on it either. He was pounding on it like he was trying to break it open. "Let me in. Let me in. It's freezing out here." Being homeless myself, I did have some sympathy for the man, but there was no way I was letting this guy into my car. I knew nothing about him. If he was dangerous or had an infectious disease or what have you. I shook my head and told him I couldn't do that. That set off a real bit of ferocity in the man. He began slamming the window even harder, this time definitely trying to break it. "You better let me in or I'll make you pay," he yelled at me. He had this insane look in his eyes that terrified me out of my mind. He was banging so hard I was certain he would break in my window. Scared, all I could think to do was get up and jump into the front seat of the car. I started it up just as the guy successfully busted my back window open. Thankfully, this was not a horror movie, and the car started up right away. I pulled away before anything else happened, but I was definitely shaken up. I went back to the parking lot of the restaurant I worked in. I never tried sleeping there because I didn't want them to know that I lived in my car. With what just happened though, I decided it was worth the risk. Fortunately, although the window was broken, it didn't fall into pieces in the car. It just stayed in place, visibly broken. Still, it let in enough cold throughout the night that it was very difficult for me to get sleep there. When I was in high school, I was in all the clubs. I loved sports, especially basketball. I was hardly ever out of the gym, except for Tuesdays when the volleyball team had the run of the gym. On Tuesdays, I would work out with the team in the local park. We would run into the park, do some stretches, muscle training, then run back to school. One Tuesday, we got to the park, and there was this strange woman there. From that day on, she would always be there. I say she was strange because she would just sit down and stare at us. I think she must have worked in the nearby office because she was always wearing professional clothes. She would often talk to herself too, completely unintelligible things. She seemed completely harmless, and my friends and I were more focused on our training, so we didn't pay her that much attention. When you know someone is staring at you though, especially for a long period of time, it really throws you off. I mean, it was really creepy, and it was every time we went to the park as well. I just tried my best to ignore her. On the day in question, there were about 20 of us training in the park. It was an incredibly hot day, and I could sense that some of the group were very irritable, especially my friend Yuji. For some reason, he took his irritation out on this woman. "Hey, you stare at us every day," he shouted. I was annoyed that he'd done that. I mean, we could have easily just ignored her. I honestly thought people like that were better off left alone anyway. Who knew how she'd react? She didn't say a word back to him. She just scowled and kept staring. Yuji seemed content with his victory and said nothing more to antagonize her. We all headed back to the school soon after. The following Tuesday, we went to run in the park again. But this time, the woman wasn't there. Maybe Yuji shouting at her had really scared her off. I wondered what happened. As we jogged this time, we were able to exercise without being stared at. Honestly, it was very relieving. We stayed a bit longer than we had before. Yuji was at the water fountain, washing his face quickly. I looked away from him for just a second, and when I looked back, she was standing right behind him. I shivered. It felt horrible to see her again. She looked so angry. I could tell something bad was about to happen. She was holding a towel, which she swiftly switched out for Yuji's towel. Yuji hadn't realized she was there. He had his head over the fountain. He blindly gripped for the towel. "Oh God," I heard myself mutter. Some of the other kids around noticed this too. We shouted at him to stop and not touch that towel. He turned his head towards us, and as he did, the woman made a run for it. We ran over to take a look at that towel she'd replaced his with. Interlaced throughout it, there were several long pins like you'd find in a pin cushion. Yuji had an insanely close call there. If he had brought that pin-riddled towel up to his face, who knows how badly he would have been injured. We stopped going to the park for a while and told the school about it. We were worried we would see the woman again. I only saw her once more after I graduated. I saw her out shopping. She was with some friends, acting completely normal. She must have had ice in her veins because she gave me the most friendly smile when she recognized me. I haven't been in contact with Yuji since we graduated. I wonder if he's doing all right after everything that happened. This happened around when I was 10 in the 1980s. My family had a house with a really huge backyard. I had a tent, and occasionally me and my friend Jimmy would camp out in the backyard. We would often set the tent pretty far back from the house so as to have some privacy from our parents. Right behind our yard was this large forest that was fenced off for some reason that I've never known. It was pretty late at night, and normally we would have already gone to sleep by then. The two of us were up late with the flashlight though, telling ghost stories like kids usually do. We got ourselves pretty worked up, and I guess it could have been our imagination, but we began to hear things outside of the tent. It almost sounded like someone was creeping around in the forest, right on the other side of that fence. We turned our flashlights off. I'm not really sure why, but it seemed like the appropriate thing to do, as if that could make us hear better or something. I know how silly that sounds, but hey, we were 10 years old. Surprisingly, we did clearly make out some sounds out there. Jimmy decided to look out the flap of the tent to see what was going on. I have to admit, I was too frightened to do so myself. Jimmy looked out for a few moments before ducking back into the tent. He told me he could see someone hiding in the bushes just on the other side of the fence. I accused him of trying to scare me, of course. but he swore up and down that he was not. Well, that was around when I heard my mom calling for us. She was still way on the other side of the yard, but it was obvious she was running out towards us. She sounded very distressed. Jimmy and I came out of the tent and hurried over to her. She told us we needed to get into the house ASAP. We were going to grab our things first, but she insisted that could wait until the next day, and we needed to get inside right now. We were told a man who had killed several children had just escaped from prison. The report had come on the news right before my mom had run out and got us. We told her about what we'd heard and what Jimmy claimed to have seen. I have no idea if she believed us or not. She didn't call the police. It was a scary moment when she told us that. I mean, Jimmy swore he saw someone out there, and we both knew what we had heard. We have no way of knowing if whoever was out there was the escaped killer, of course, but at the moment, Jimmy and I both believed it, and the two of us didn't camp out again for a very long time. This happened March of last year. I was living in a really cheap apartment complex. It was all I could afford at the time. The apartment was tiny and my neighbors were a lot older than me. The vibe of the building was very much single dudes. One night in March at around 2 a.m., I was lying on my bed reading a book. I have a habit of staying up late. All of a sudden, I heard a loud banging sound at the door. Someone was trying my door handle as well. It sounded like someone was trying to kick the door in. I could hear it shaking with the impact. I thought it was someone annoyed and making some sort of complaint about noise, but I hadn't made a single sound in the last 2 hours. I didn't have the TV on and I wasn't playing music either. I'm not ashamed to say I was absolutely bricking it at this point. It was really frightening. I managed to muster up enough courage to creep over to the door and put my eye to the peephole. I saw a guy out there I had never seen before. He looked to be about 50 years old and had this totally insane look on his face. I didn't understand why this guy was so pissed off. I hadn't ever had any trouble with any of the residents here. I didn't really want to do so now either, but after 5 agonizing minutes, it was clear this guy was not going to give up hammering on the door. I thought it would be better to talk to this idiot. Before he woke up the whole damn building, I put the chain on the door and slowly opened it. The instant I inched the door open, a knife jutted through the gap. It danced its way toward me. I pushed on the door as hard as I could, and thankfully the owner of the knife seemed to be weaker than me. The door closed shut the whole way, and everything fell silent. I didn't get a good look at the guy's face. I shouted through the door, "Hey, what the fuck was that?" I never got a reply. I just heard someone board the elevator and it departing. Could it be that someone had mistaken my room for another? Did someone on this floor have a grudge against another person? What kind of grudge provokes a spontaneous knife attack? I thought the residents here were all older anyway. None of this made any sense. Everyone in the building seemed mostly nice, and there had never been any trouble as far as I knew. I just couldn't figure it out. I couldn't do much about it either. I decided I couldn't do anything but get some rest. I had to work the next day anyway. Yes, I know I should have called the police, but I didn't do so. The following night, or if I should more accurately say the following morning, the same thing happened again. The same psycho showed up at my door, knife in hand. I was scared and angry now. The adrenaline was really pumping through me. "What are you doing? You've got the wrong guy. Who does this at this time of night?" I shouted all kinds of stuff, hoping something would make sense to this guy out there. I grabbed a big piece of wood. It was part of a shelf that had recently come down. I was ready to knock some sense into this guy. I was also ready to call the police. I just didn't know which was going to be the most effective first. I decided to take one more look out the peephole. The guy was just kind of standing there in a daze. I got a good chance to look at his face, and that's when I began to recognize him from somewhere. I had only ever bumped into him in the lobby a couple of times. He always made small talk with me and seemed like a really nice older guy. He'd even asked me if I wanted to have dinner with him one of those times. Well, I was really glad I didn't accept that invitation now. I think he lived somewhere below me. I couldn't get my head around this. Why was he now just randomly attacking me? I called the police right away. I kept silent all the while he continued to hammer on my door and try the lock. Anyway, to cut an incredibly frustrating story short, the guy was interviewed by the police when they arrived. I gave my statement, but as far as I can tell, he made it out like he was totally innocent. He pretended he knew nothing about what happened. The cops patronized me and kept asking me if I was under the influence. They warned me not to lie to the cops. Well, I knew what I'd seen. What frightened me the most is that he got away with it so easily. Would he do it again? The police wouldn't do anything about him, I realized. I bumped into him a couple more times before I moved out. He would just smile at me and put his hands in his pockets. I've been struggling to find a reason for his resentment towards me, but I could come up with nothing. Maybe it's because I was young or something. Keep an eye on your neighbors. That old saying, a wolf in sheep's clothing, can really be more true than you realize. I'm a woman. I was leaving my friend's apartment around 10 p.m. to go back to my car that was parked on the street around the corner. I had my 12-pound dog with me, and we were walking towards the car. I'll typically switch the sides of the street I'm walking on to avoid people that looked questionable or if someone is right behind me. The life of being a woman, since we always have to be alert for that kind of stuff. I was walking up the empty sidewalk to my car when a strange-looking man started crossing the street right towards me. There was no reason for him to be crossing the street that I could tell. I started to get a really bad feeling in my gut and decided to turn around and go back to my friend's apartment. As I turned around, I noticed he'd begun sprinting and was now following me. I called my friend and started yelling into the phone. "Come downstairs and let me in. There's a guy behind me." You have to be let into her apartment lobby by a resident on the inside. Me and my dog were sprinting down the street, and I kept looking behind me. The guy was starting to gain on me. I was in a full run, but even so, he was still a bit faster. My dog was so confused, but trying her hardest to keep up. Luckily, my friend was down there, waiting to let me in. We ran in and shut the door. The guy walked by just as I got the door shut. He stopped running and started walking casually as if nothing had ever happened and continued on his way. I waited for 30 minutes, shaking with my heart racing. After I calmed down, my friend walked me to my car this time, and I drove her back to her apartment. I have no idea what might have happened if he'd caught me, but I'd never been so scared for my life. I know this can happen to guys too, but it's sad how every time I'm walking alone, I always have to be on the lookout for guys just like this. Always trust your instincts, even if nothing might happen. It's better to be safe than sorry. I remember one night around 3 a.m. or so, I was sitting at home on my PC watching some movies, playing some games, etc. It was at that point that I noticed I was all out of cigarettes. The only thing that works late at night is our local gas station. It was not too far away from my home, but it was easier to go in a car anyway. I grabbed my car keys, locked up my house, and started driving down to the gas station. I live in a small European country, which is rated as the most safe country on the entire planet. That doesn't mean that no bad things happen here and there, though. When you exit from a suburban area where I live, you need to take a right so you can make the main road. After that, you just go straight for about half a kilometer, then go for another half to get to the gas station. About halfway there, I noticed a girl on the sidewalk apparently in a run. She looked really panicked. I looked behind her and noticed two guys were 10 feet away chasing her. They were pointing at her and yelling something towards her. They gave me a really creepy vibe. I pulled in right next to this girl. I noticed she had a scared face on, like she was about to cry and burst into tears. I opened my window and pretended like I knew her, then very quietly asked, "Are you in some trouble?" She looked at me and nodded. I told her to jump in my car, and that's what she did. I told her I was going to the gas station to get some cigarettes, but I would take her home as soon as we got there and I did my business. She thanked me like 100 times. I asked if she wanted me to drive her down to the station to report it, but she said I could just take her home. I went to the gas station, got some cigarettes and some stuff for her, and took her home after. We passed by the same street where those two guys had been chasing her, but they were nowhere to be seen. Imagine what would have happened if I hadn't happened to run out of cigarettes that night. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.